for Global Climate Governance at Climate Action Network France. And shortly, to talk about Carney's backsliding, if you're in Canada or beyond, he's set to come out with an announcement today all about gas. So that is climate backsliding. And we'll be hearing shortly from Janelle Lapointe from the Suzuki Foundation, who's going to be talking about the impact of this, but Carney's move on Indigenous peoples, communities, as well as workers and the just transition. But first we're going to kick off with Maureen. So Maureen, I understand there's 2 negotiating groups. Is that right? What's happening in each one? Let's start with the first one.
All right. Hello everyone, nice to be with you here. So yes, maybe you're thinking, wait, the Global Stocktake happened 2 years ago, right? So why are we still talking about this? Well, in Dubai, parties agreed to create a dialogue that should continue until the next GST to discuss on how they can make what they are deciding real, how the decision in Dubai can really be implemented at the national level. And that's the first room. It's the UAE dialogue room. It's a bit a shame because this dialogue was actually meant to happen last year, so we are still on a delay, and parties are disagreeing on what they should exactly discuss about implementation. Why is the GST not real now? Is it because there's not the finance we need, so we should focus this dialogue on finance, right? And others are saying, no, in this dialogue we should discuss what the topics that don't have any negotiation tracks, for example, energy transition, that is not for now in a concrete room for negotiation. And just to be clear, they are fighting on this since almost 2 years now. So right now, I must say, maybe to finish on this one, it's extremely dependent on the consultations happening from the presidency. As you know, some of the topics the presidency have put on the table is the finance issue, the 9.1 issue, and also the NDC and 1.5 question. Of course, if parties have satisfied answers to these in the consultation, the tension in the UAE dialogue might loosen up a bit. If the conversation is beginning to be complicated, the dialogue might also have a kind of bad impact. So just to say, these rooms are very connected, and parties will just try to use the UAE dialogue for the topics they are not satisfied for in other rooms. So we have to keep a bit wait, probably until Monday, to know exactly if they are going to sort this out or not.
So, which is your favorite room?
Oh, that's a big question. No, I guess the second room is the one I prefer, the GST2 room, because there's a bit more hope. So, just so you know, the next GST is happening in 2028, and parties are trying to refine it. So it doesn't mean we'll change the basic of the process. It's been decided, but maybe they can have some refinements. And we, as civil society, we are proposing for a real citizens' participation in the next Global Stocktake. As you know, we have observers here. They could go to the dialogues. They could be in the GST rooms, but that's kind of a mini part of the people. We really want the people to fit in the GST with statements, declaration, and people's assemblies. So we are pushing for having a decision and a mandate for the IPCC to organize such formats for the GST to happening, as I said, in 3 years. So that's something I'm really happy to fight for. But this room is also still a bit complicated for now.
And what would break the... and what would break... Tech. What would break the confusion for you? You know, what needs to happen here at COP to make it clear what's going to happen at the Stocktake?
I think the discussions on the Global Stocktake will not get better if we don't have a good outcome on climate finance. It's extremely, it's extremely embedded. And so I think what we need here is a clear commitment from developed countries that there will be a better delivery of climate finance, so that the discussions in the GST rooms are a bit more, let's say, more productive. And on the second Global Stocktake planning, unfortunately this is not happening in this COP, this is happening in the IPCC rooms, it's very connected as well. So we will have to wait until March, where apparently the IPCC is meeting, to be sure that the coordination between the next GST and the next IPCC report are being well coordinated.
Let's delve in a little bit more to the IPCC and what's kind of going on there. What's your sense on where they're at for these talks?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so maybe I can clarify a bit. Again, the next big IPCC report, the AR7 report, is planned to come out between the end of 2028 and 2029. The outline has been proposed almost 2 years ago inside the IPCC rooms, because this is in the IPCC that you decide, right, when the next report is coming out. And so just so you know, first, the timeline is a bit different as the previous reports. Normally, the IPCC takes around 7 years to do such a report, and right now the timeline was about 5 years to be aligned with the GST happening in 2028. The problem is that having a shorter timeline is actually having an impact, especially on the global south participation in the next IPCC report, because they already have kind of a lot of struggling to be on time, they have less capacities, they must translate a lot because they're not doing the research in English as the IPCC is asking. So there is a kind of big tension in the IPCC room, and for now, several countries from the global south are saying we can't agree with this timeline, we need one report, one of the several reports that is doing this big AR7 report being a bit delayed to 2029. And some parties also do not agree on that, they want everything in 2028, so that's in the GST. And so they are fighting over this in the IPCC rooms, and until this is not solved, the GST2 organization cannot really get through. The GST2 will still happen, right? Again, it was decided, but just the coordination between the two rooms will not be settled. And so we will have to wait 2028 with a bit more of chaos to see how the reports of the IPCC are going to fit or not inside the GST. So again, on this issue, we will have to wait for the IPCC to decide on the timeline to be sure this is working well, or if we will have to adapt in 2028 so that the stocktake is still, well provided with the best available science.
And just a last question to you, Maureen. So you've been working on Global Stocktake for a little while. How are you feeling about where we're at, on your journey of following Global Stocktake? How are you feeling right now about the trajectory for it?
I feel, weirdly, I feel better than last year. It's extremely tense, as I say, the two rooms are not getting much further. But I feel that at this COP, the parties really don't want the same Baku failure, where the two GST texts went not out, we had no results. So I see in the room there is much more engagement, even from parties who were till now very silent or not very constructive, they are trying. So I feel there is this, let's say, this pressure of COP30, with the NDCs, the 10 years of the Paris Agreement, they just want something else. So I feel a bit more constructive discussions than the last year. So I feel maybe we can achieve something, and I just hope that we will send the good signal that the GST one was worth, and so that there is still a good, let's say, political traction for the next process in 2028, because this is actually the, let's say, the challenge, right? We need the GST to still have a good political traction. So it needs to be well prepared, and it's also depending on how GST1 will be really implemented and impacted or not. So it's a very big moment, but there's a bit more hope than the past months.
Great, so now I'm going to turn to Janelle, who's joined us, and who's going to give us the download on what's going on in Canada and with Carney and the climate backsliding that we're seeing. So Janelle, fill us in, take it away.
Sure. Spusi, Janelle, Stelaten, Inkaz, Luxiliu, Asli. My name is Janelle Lapointe. I am from the village of Stella, which is a small indigenous community in rural, what we know as colonial called Canada. And Canada is really bearing the impacts of their continued resource extraction on indigenous lands. Canada is one of the highest emitting countries per capita, but despite that has really positioned itself as a climate leader over the last few years. We now consider climate impacts the norm in Canada. Our summers are filled with smoky skies and disastrous wildfires. We've had droughts that are really stressing our electricity grid. We're a hydropower nation. And floods that have cost Canadian provinces billions. So we're in a really dire circumstance in Canada, and of course, Indigenous nations are bearing the brunt of those impacts. So Canada is really creating climate refugees internationally with its emissions, and now domestically with its failure to adapt and mitigate climate change. But over the past few months, we've seen some pretty disappointing announcements from Prime Minister Mark Carney and their government. A few months ago, Prime Minister Mark Carney introduced legislation called Bill C5, which is fast-tracking legislation which allows major projects in the national interest to forego important measures that we have to keep these corporations and these projects accountable, such as environmental assessments. This allows projects to not have to go through free, prior, and informed consent from Indigenous nations. Last week, we saw Prime Minister Carney introduce a budget that has very little mention of climate, a walk back of important measures such as our greenwashing legislation, which was meant to stop proponents such as LNG from greenwashing and saying that they're actually a real climate solution. And this afternoon, we are expecting another announcement of major projects that will include further expansion of LNG, likely the Silosyms terminal, which is a 100% American-owned LNG project. So I'm left here wondering what this government considers in the national interest. Certainly doesn't seem to take climate into consideration, and definitely doesn't seem to take the needs and wants of Indigenous nations into consideration. And I think it's really misleading domestically to Canadians who want to see projects in the national interest and are concerned about the threat of America to the Canadian economy, but yet we're supporting these projects that are owned by American billionaires that are in President Donald Trump's closest circle. We have our environmental minister here at COP this week, and she entered COP by saying that Canada is committed to keeping the world below 1.5 degrees, and that climate action is not only the moral thing to do, but the economically responsible thing to do. Those words sound really nice, but when we have these announcements happening back home, I feel like Canada is failing Indigenous people domestically and internationally as well.
Thanks so much, Janelle, for that. So can you delve in a little bit more on the impacts it's having on people, like Carney's actions are having on people's everyday lives when it comes to their jobs, their well-being, their health?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Canadians are in an extreme affordability crisis, which of course is exacerbated by having to survive climate impacts. And these LNG projects come on the table really promising prosperity for communities. They're promising thousands of jobs, and of course Canadians are really wanting opportunities to put food on the table and provide for their families. And we're being told by proponents of the LNG industry that their product is healthy for Canadians and that there is little climate impact, but we're seeing the opposite in the projects that have already been completed. Disastrous health effects where doctors in the regions where these pipelines are being built are having overflowing hospital rooms and family doctor rooms, and many of them are actually moving themselves and their family out of the region because of the health impacts. And so people are waking up to the realization that the promises they were told about LNG being safe, good, prosperous, aren't actually true, and that a majority of these jobs don't even go to local communities. And so this is particularly concerning from an Indigenous context where Indigenous communities are in a circumstance where they're trying to survive state manufactured poverty. I mean, they've been completely excluded from the Canadian economy. While the Canadian economy has built all of its wealth on extraction of Indigenous land and the labor of working Canadians. And now they're being offered partnerships on these projects, which is fishy to me, as I know that the rest of the world is moving to renewable energies. Canada just really doesn't have, for many reasons, geography reasons, just the economic market reasons. When LNG hits its peak and begins to crash, we have no control over that. Canadian LNG will probably be the first to suffer. And so I'm really concerned that First Nations and Indigenous community are offered ownership, that they're taking out massive loans to be a part of these projects, and are now potentially being stuck with the stranded assets of these projects and these huge financial risks that they will not be able to recover from.
So just transition is a big focus that civil society here is pushing for at COP30. What's your take on just transition, and what would be your advice to Mark Carney?
Yeah, a fair and equitable just transition for Indigenous communities and working people is critical, and I'm glad to see that be such a focus of COP30. But in order for a just transition to be possible, we need other economic opportunities for rural Indigenous communities. If we're only offering these major resource extraction projects, we are setting up to fail on a just transition, and so I would like to see massive government investments in economic alternatives for rural Indigenous communities, and a well thought out plan with funding attached to it in order to move these communities into the new economy like the rest of the world is transitioning to.
And then for the Canadian Environment Minister who's here, you know, we're sensing Canada's a bit of a skeptic around just transition. You know, we're seeing obviously the gas move today. What would you like them to be doing in those negotiation rooms?
Yeah, I think Canada's well positioned to lead on this. We have a lot of nations that are grid ready, are excited about this next phase of energy for the world, and are ready to lead on a just transition front. So I really hope that Canada and the environmental minister can get out of the way and kind of support that new ambition. I fear that the Prime Minister Carney has sent the environmental minister here to say the nice words and to look like a leader on the global stage. But the reality is she's not given as much power as the Major Projects Office has been given. And so anything that happens here, we cannot allow it to be steamrolled by the ambitions of the Major Project Office, which are more concerned about corporate deals that enrich the Canadian elite and our foreign partners rather than the well-being of Canadians. And so I would like to also encourage our government to start taking this matter more serious and to empower the environmental minister to listen to what she's hearing on the ground.
Thank you, Janelle. So we'll go to questions in the room. Any questions for the panel? Yes.
Do you want me to speak into this? Can you hear me? Oh, wow. Sarah Schoenhart from ENE News Politico. I apologize, I came in a bit late, so I didn't hear your introduction, Maureen, but I was hoping you could talk a little bit about if you sense any impact from the absence of the US in the negotiations. And also, on the finance question, has anyone addressed the 100 billion? I know that OECD is delaying their report, but given that the US is not contributing finance anymore, do you think that would be met this year? And if not, what could that mean for the bigger goal of the 300 billion?
Thank you for your question. So first on the US not presence, let's say it has an impact in terms of credibility of the process. Like we have more people from the outside telling us, why is this COP even worth if they are not in the room? But in terms of negotiations, I must say we can compare, for example, because they were in the room in Baku last year, already with some new guidelines from even if the new president was not already established, they had already new guidelines to follow more his steer, and they were extremely not, how do you say in English, sorry, they were extremely not productive in the negotiations. And from that perspective, in some rooms, and mine is, for example, a good example, there are less tensions because they are not here. Or the gender room is also very much more, the text work is easier because they are not in the room to try to block or. So it depends on which topic, but more generally, it can have, in terms of negotiations, very technically, it can have, it can loosen up a bit the situation. And I just finished that also, that just to know that actually since years, the presence of the US in the room is not always very positive, right? I mean, it's not just because now that they already did it before, and even if the times they were still in the Paris Agreement, they were not always allies. So I'm not saying this is not serious, it's a real problem to have such a country not being in the Paris Agreement, so we really regret it. But just want to emphasize that there were no really climate leaders. So we are not losing an extreme good player anyway in that matter, but still a shame, of course. And on your question on finance, well, that's I call it the ghost of Baku. Like we had a bad decision in Baku on climate finance, and there is this roadmap of the 1.3 trillion and the reports that came around. It's quiet for now. It's extremely worrying because some parties are saying, yeah, we won't have it this year, that's for sure, but we will kind of fast being able to go to the 1.3 trillion, but with private finance, mostly private finance. And there's absolutely no willingness to go beyond the sorry, now it's the numbers in English for me, the 3,000, how do you say? Well, the decision in Baku last year was about 300 million. 300,000, sorry, it's always hard for me. There's absolutely no willingness right now in the rooms to have a better, like to enhance and to get a better number and a better quality of climate finance. So if the 1.3 trillion is mentioned, it's always with the private finance, and that's not what we want. So I'm afraid, in terms of finance outcome this year, we are in a tricky position, also because we don't have a concrete negotiation room, right? So this is happening in the corridors. So extremely untransparent as well. So let's see in week 2 if this takes more space or not.
Any other questions from the room? Okay, let's give the final word to Janelle. Just really sum up what you would say to Mark Carney if he walked into the room right now.
Okay, I'll try to be nice. Absolutely, Prime Minister Mark Carney, first and foremost, has a responsibility to uphold free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. And so any ambitions that Mark Carney has to build new projects in so-called Canada must meet the standard of FPIC and make First Nations full partners as sovereign Indigenous people and their full rights and title. And I think if we allow that, we'll see more climate ambition, because I know that's what First Nations want as part of their cultural values and their commitment to their land, their waters, and their people.
Thank you, and thank you to those who joined us in the room today. It's a tricky room to find, so the recording will be available on the CAN YouTube channel if you want to watch back. And just tap us up if you have any questions and you weren't able to get to them. And thank you to those online who tuned in yet again. Our panel are available for interviews after this press briefing. So tomorrow we'll have the press conference in press room 2, area D. So see you there. Thank you.